I just came back from a retreat where during an MDA ceremony, the big thing for me is I got to hold my dad's hand again. And
Mm,
and I know it sounds like, okay, that's what's the big deal? The big deal is that I've kind of always put him as the bad father figure, just by every measurable equation. He's not father of the year. He's not getting that little trophy in
mm,
the slippers. Um, but I do remember I had all these memories of him holding my hand when I was growing up. So as much as I wouldn't have I don't treat my children the way he treated me and my sister. Um, I know in his way he was trying to show me he loved me to the best that he was capable of. And he was running from a bunch of demons. His father died when he was like 11 or 12, and he had a bunch of stuff. And then the alcoholism kind of stunts the
mhm.
maturing process. But in his way, he was trying to show me he loved me, and I really felt it um, just a few weeks ago, and I haven't felt that in 20 years.
Welcome back to Spotlight Media, the podcast. I am your host, David Flores, CEO of Spotlight Media. And joining me here today is Mr. Matt Zemon, co-founder of Happy and a psychedelic medicine advocate, collaborative leader, and entrepreneur. Matt, great to see you again. How you doing?
David, I'm doing well. It's always good to talk with you.
Yeah, it always is great to connect with you. And, it's been about a year and a half since we last connected. I was still living in Oregon at the time. I'm back in Vegas now. But in that time, you've done some things. You went out, wrote a book, which we're going to talk about right here,
Oh,
Psychedelics,
I see
for
the
everyone.
sticky notes.
Yeah,
I'm
yeah. So it
curious.
was definitely a great read. But yeah, I mean, making me feel a little insecure here. In the last year and a half, you go out, write a book. I don't know if I can claim anything that exciting, but great to
I'm
have you
not
on.
trying to lead a publicly traded company at the same time, so it gives me a little bit more time than you probably have, David.
Yeah, you're fortunate. Yeah, yeah. Consider yourself lucky. So, but yeah, nonetheless, we're here to talk about the book. Yeah, as I've been telling you, I mean, I found the book, incredibly fascinating. And, I know a lot of our viewers and listeners out there, we've got some folks that are curious about psychedelics, and rightfully so. There's a lot, going around about psychedelics right now in the media. It seems like every week somebody's coming out sharing their story. Just a couple of weeks ago, it was Prince Harry, of all people, and for better or worse, sharing his story of his psychedelic experience and journey, and somehow ended up having a conversation with a toilet. So it was one of the more fascinating stories shared by a notable public figure out there. But nonetheless, that creates curiosity for people out there in society. And so, Psychedelics for Everyone, which is a beginner's guide to these powerful medicines for anxiety, depression, addiction, PTSD, and expanding consciousness. In my opinion, I think is a great starting point for anyone out there looking to explore psychedelics and wanting to find a good starting point. But as someone like myself that's been immersed in this space for a couple of years now, I also found it fascinating. And I think what stood out the most to me was the personal stories that you share, and being able to be so open and transparent about sharing things that have happened to you. And we'll get into some of that in a bit, but I guess to tee up things here, why don't you share a little bit about the inspiration behind writing the book, and what you hope readers will come away from when reading Psychedelics for Everyone.
Yeah, so David, I was lucky. I mean, I had friends who had hired a guide, and I was like, oh, well, if they hired a guide, this person needs absolutely knows what they're doing, so I'm totally going to be safe. But and I did get lucky. The guide was reasonable, but not as experienced as what I've come to learn you really should expect when you're or look for when you're going on a psychedelic experience. So when I finished that first psychedelic journey, it's like, oh my gosh, how do I know more? How do I get to learn more about this? And I found that either the literature I found was too complicated. It was written for people with a science background, which I did not have at that point, or it was kind of too woo woo, for lack of a better word. It was like all this esoteric stuff. I was like, I don't relate to that. So I wanted to create a book that wasn't too technical, wasn't too opinionated, wasn't too woo woo, that anybody could read. And at the same time, I had every chapter medically reviewed for accuracy and references included, so that if you want to dive deep, you can, but you can read this, you can trust the information. And the book, it was written with the idea of like, okay, I believe psychedelics are not everybody needs to take a psychedelic,
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
but that they're for everybody. They're good for society. So that I'm hoping that when people read this book, it's like, okay, this might help me. Okay, that's one way to read it. Oh, I could see how someone I love could benefit from this. That's another way to read it. And the third is, I don't really know anybody, but I can understand why this is important, and I will vote next time it matters. And that's a third way to read it. So that's kind of my hope, that this is spreading good information. It's fighting the 50 years of
Mm-hmm.
propaganda that we've all grown up with, and people can make good decisions after reading this.
Yeah, most definitely. I mean, and I think it's so important, right now at this pivotal point in time where psychedelics really are starting to push their way into society, for people to be able to access reliable resources and information out there. And I think, again, Psychedelics for Everyone presents that opportunity for individuals. And you saying that you've had it reviewed and everything, it just lends to the credibility that I think the book presents here. But, again, I think what also helps here is, you sort of set the table by sharing some personal stories, especially in the beginning. And that's kind of where I want to start here. You share the story of losing your mom when she was 49. You were 22 at the time. And this is in the early chapter, Processing Grief. And so I'm going to read a little bit here from it, to help sort of set the table here for listeners and viewers out there, to help give them a little bit of context here. But it says, when my mom died, it felt like a piece of my heart was ripped out of me. I could feel the emptiness. When we buried her, I wailed. I didn't know what it meant to wail before that day. That day, I unleashed a primal scream into the world. That's a very powerful statement there. It really got me as, someone that lost my father at age 59.
Mm.
So I can certainly understand that. But goes on here to say that, you put this part of you in terms of losing your mom into a drawer and went on living as the living do. And life was fine. And it's similar to what a lot of us do. And, later on, you said it would be several years later in one of your first psilocybin experiences and journeys that you would reconnect with your mom and sort of revisit these feelings and these emotions. So would you, be kind enough to kind of share what that experience was like in terms of revisiting the death of your mom and that experience and the emotions that were tied to it?
Yeah, I'm happy to. I'm sorry about your experience with losing your father. I mean, 59 is also way too young.
It
Um,
is way too young.
Way too young. At the time when you're 20, when I was 22, I looked at 49 as really old. Now that I've crossed the 50 mark, it's like, oh my gosh, that is
Not old
like
at all.
not
Still
old at
young.
all. Yeah, yeah. And not really old, but it was older, I guess. That first psilocybin experience, I truly felt my mom was there, and that I could, what I say in the book, is I could pull a string, like I could feel her and pull her energy into me and then push that energy into my kids. And it was just became apparent that she's not gone. She's just in a different place. And that I'm in many ways a continuation of her. I can embody her feminine energy and take that forward, and that's okay. That's not something to be ashamed of. It's not, it's just, it's more than okay. And that my kids are going to take all of our energy and move that forward. So we're all part of the same continuum. Um, Coming to that realization was just so healing. I just, I went from, I miss my mom to, okay, I miss being with my mom physically, but she's still here. And, and then that led to a whole bunch of realizations of like, oh my gosh, how much of my life have I done because I've been afraid of dying, or I just assumed I was going to die
Yeah.
young?
Yeah.
And how much how many relationships have I not really allowed to develop because I didn't think they were going to be everlasting relationships? Um, huge epiphanies for me, just one after another. Boom. Okay, I am not going to die young, and oh my gosh, I, 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 I am capable of loving way more deeply than I'm doing today, and giving that love out freely, and not, yeah, huge, just incredibly different. And since that moment, I've been on this path where it's like, okay, I want to learn more about kind of the mechanics of how does this work, and I want to feel more. I want to not reserve my intimacy for a bedroom. I want to share an experience with many more people to broaden my definition of family from the nuclear family to us all being kind of brothers and sisters, and radically different. Have you, wait, so you've going through the experience you've gone through with your father, did you have similar ideas, or what was this experience like for you, or how does psychedelics connect to your father?
Yeah, so coincidentally, leading up to his passing in 2018. So to lay little groundwork here and some context. My father was an alcoholic,
Mm-hmm.
heavy drug user, suffered from depression, suffered from anxiety, and his health just completely deteriorated. Over the last few years of his life, and he became just a shell of his former self, and so it was a death that I was somewhat prepared for, as much as I think anyone can prepare themselves for losing a parent. But nonetheless, at that time, that's when I was first starting to discover psychedelics outside of recreational psychedelics and being used for parties or for concerts and things like that. But I was working in the cannabis space, and so I was coming across stories and articles related to psychedelics and psilocybin, MDMA being used for PTSD and whatnot, and hearing these stories of people very similar to what I was witnessing with my father, suffering from addiction or depression, and actually finding relief. And it's unfortunate, of course, that we didn't have the time to try to introduce psychedelic assisted therapy to my father. To be quite honest, I don't know how receptive he would have been. He was very stubborn in the sense that he didn't think he had a problem, even though his life was deteriorating and his health was deteriorating as a direct result of the alcohol that he continued to drink and partake in all the way up until his death. So you know all of that, obviously, there's a lot of internal trauma, growing up with an alcoholic father that I've had to internalize and I've dealt with. And, shortly after his passing is when I first had my psychedelic experience and my psychedelic journey, not in a medical setting or anything like that. I was out on a hike with some friends out in Southern California. And I just remember sitting, under a tree, and the emotions were so raw, of losing my father. And the emotions were mostly anger. Like, this could have been prevented. You could have prevented this. You didn't have to die. Like, this didn't have to be this way. And that was the first sort of feeling that I started to process. And then that sort of transitioned into grief, into sadness, like, oh my God, my dad, my one and only dad is gone. I'm never going to be able to talk to him again or see him. And so there was just this overwhelming sadness. And then it eventually transitioned into this understanding that, he's no longer suffering, that I have no control over the decisions that he made in his life. And I have to let go of acting like I had any control, and just understanding that, he's still with me, and I still could feel him. And to this day, I still do. And a lot of what motivates me and keeps me going to this day is, wanting to, in some way, live out a life that I know he wanted, that he aspired to live out, but his demons just would never get out of the way and let him do it. So for me, it really was helping to process all of that and come to this understanding and finding peace in his passing, despite the years and years of trauma, that, myself, my brother, and my mom were exposed to, which, we can get into a little bit more later on. But that's more or less, my experience, my journey. Since then, there have been some more revelations and whatnot, but that's kind of, I think the best overview of, what I experienced with it.
It's beautiful. Well, the journey you've been on, hard, beautiful, and
Yeah.
it's interesting. We talk about this technology, talk about psychedelics as a technology
Mhm.
that in many ways it's hard to explain, and sometimes it's as simple as that. It's like, okay, I had this feeling about XYZ situation or my father, the trauma he's caused, and through this, I was able to come to a different appreciation, a different understanding, kind of land differently than I might have without the technology.
Yeah.
Um, I know just things that are resonating for me, Dave, and what you said. Like my father was a tremendous alcoholic, and
Mhm.
having that super smart provided, but I lived in that variability of who am I going to experience at any given minute, and is
Yeah.
this going to be nice dad or raging dad? And trying to be the peacekeeper at an early age and being
Yeah.
thrust kind of into that adult role early on. That's hard stuff.
It is. Yeah, I mean that's exactly, I mean that resonates with me on a very personal level. We never knew, when my father we would hear his van pull up at night, and we never knew who was going to walk through the door. Was it going to be, the dad walking through the door with a dozen donuts, and in a good mood, and asking, how was your day? Or was it going to be the dad that had been drinking and was just looking to pick a fight? He was never physically abusive, but there was a lot of verbal and emotional abuse. And if you caught him in one of his moods, he was there just to pick a fight. And I think that was him, obviously dealing with his own trauma, which I don't want to get too ahead of ourselves, but it was one of the things that I really, really experienced in a later on psychedelic journey of mine, where I was almost like living through my dad and his experiences in his younger days. So he grew up and was born in Managua, Nicaragua, and was one of four children, was the only boy. And I don't know to the extent of the relationship that existed between him and his father, only knowing that it was not great and that his father shipped him off to live with a distant relative here in the United States, outside of Los Angeles in 1979. And he went to live with a distant aunt, and that wouldn't even let him live in the house. He had to live in a shed outside. And these were stories that I kind of buried, but through this psychedelic journey, I was starting to recall, because my dad just never shared a lot about himself. He was very closed off in that sense. But I had this vision of just being my dad in this shed outside in the cold, and feeling this loneliness of like, I'm in a foreign place. I don't know anybody. My family has essentially cast me off. And just, it was really this moment of like understanding where that trauma came from and where it all really stemmed from. And it just allowed me to connect with my father in a way emotionally. And it's oddly enough, this was after he passed away, but my strongest connection with him ever came through this psychedelic journey. So, um, again, it lends to being able to see things in life and experience things that I think otherwise it's like, I always look at it like tuning into a channel. You can only tune into this channel, if you're in a psychedelic journey. Otherwise, it's almost impossible to, because there's just too much. It shuts out all the background noise. I don't know if that resonates with you or not, and how specifically these psychedelic journeys work to create environments for us where we're able to again drown out the noise. Does that make sense? Is that
100%
um,
makes sense. And I'll
um,
take it one step further. I mean, I think we're, again, at the risk of being too woo, I think we're talking about intergenerational healing,
mhm.
that someone in the family can say, this stops here. So I can look at my parents and say, they weren't perfect. They loved me the best that they knew how to do. They each had their experiences that they were bringing to me, And and I want to heal for myself, and I want to understand more of what they went through so that I can not carry anything besides love for them. And then I want to teach that to the next generation,
Yeah.
or pass that on. But yeah, everything you're talking about, a resident. I mean, this last I just came back from a retreat where during an MDA ceremony, the big thing for me is I got to hold my dad's hand again, and
Mm.
and I know it sounds like, okay, that's what's the big deal. The big deal is that I've kind of always put him as the bad father figure, just by every measurable equation. He's not father of the year. He's not getting that little trophy in the slippers. Um, but I do remember I had all these memories of him holding my hand when I was growing up. So as much as I wouldn't have I don't treat my children the way he treated me and my sister. Um, I know in his way he was trying to show me he loved me to the best that he was capable of, and he was running from a bunch of demons. His father died when he was like 11 or 12, and he had a bunch of stuff. And then the alcoholism kind of stunts the
Mhm.
maturing process. But in his way, he was trying to show me he loved me, and I really felt it um, just a few weeks ago, and I haven't felt that in 20 years.
Yeah. That's beautiful. I mean, one of the last things that, that my father ever gave me, he was very sick, but, it was Christmas. I came over to visit and he had a C's candy gift card. And I'm sure it's something that someone gave him and he didn't know what to do with. But, I know he probably felt bad that he didn't get me anything and he gave me that. And, I mean, obviously it was the thought that counts.
Mhm.
But it's something that I kept with me in my wallet. And I knew at the time he was just doing so bad that yeah, I knew he wasn't going to be along be around for very much longer. But it's something that I keep with me now, and in the journeys that I've gone on, I've held it. And it's something that for me it's just I feel that connection with him, and it's something that obviously has a lot of sentimental meaning for me, but it's also a symbol of the love that I know that he had for me that maybe he was unable to demonstrate or communicate. um so that's something again that being able to process all of this and make sense of it all, I think is what's more important than anything. And I know our stories are not unique. I mean, I've
Not
had the
unusual.
privilege of speaking with well over 100 people in the last couple of years, and they've shared their journeys and their experiences, which makes you wonder, I mean, why is it so difficult for us to access, psychedelics and psychedelic therapy and things like that. And so, um, yeah, I mean, and I guess, it's a good transition to, talking a little bit about healing trauma. We kind of already, set the stage for that, but I know you share another very personal story of yours in, a situation that happened when you were at a young age, where you were exposed to inappropriate and intimate contact with an extended family member while you were going through puberty. And you go on to say that this extended family member was more than a decade older than you, and that for years you had guilt over this, which is certainly understandable. But you came to the realization, understanding that the adult in those situations should be the ones to have the wherewithal to say, no, this is not right, this is wrong. But unfortunately, there are many adults out there that just they don't process information like that. Nonetheless, you reached a point finally where this individual actually came to you in a psychedelic experience, psychedelic journey. You want to share a little bit about that and, being able to let go of that trauma. But I think this also lends to being able to forgive, because I think that's something that stands out to me too, is the ability to forgive, because until we forgive, we hold that resentment in us, and we don't understand that resentment sometimes just rots us to the core. So if you can share a little bit about that story and, being able to let go and to forgive.
So we all talk about intention. When you go into it preparing for a journey, you're going to create your intentions. I can promise you my intention was not to revisit this situation. this is something that was tucked so deep away. I besides my wife and my sister, I don't think I've told anybody about it. And when people would talk about this or talk about this type of behavior, like my ears would get red and I get a pit in my
Mm-hmm.
stomach, but I just stayed quiet. Well, sure enough, on one of these psychedelic experiences, it's I was right there, right back in the situation, in the last situation between me and her, and I was again mortified. I was like, I don't want to be here. Um, I had a great at this point. I had kind of psychedelic practice,
Mm-hmm.
and I'd been told over and over, okay, if you see something you don't like, you've got to lean into it. You got to ask, what are you here to teach me? Um, in this case, I was able to remove kind of the concept of shame, blame, and guilt and look at her and say, okay, wow, she was feeling so unloved. Her father had essentially abandoned her. She wasn't as smart or as talented or as pretty as her sibling. She um she was struggling with substance use challenges. Um, I think she was confused on her sexuality. She had a lot of things going on, and she just wanted to be loved. And I don't have to condone the behavior to understand the humanity. And and I could do it. I got myself there. I'm like, okay, this was a awful decisions, awful choices, not the right execution. But I can understand. I wish it wasn't so, but I can understand. And as soon as I got there in this journey, it's like it just went away. And now there isn't any embarrassment talking about it um, at all. And there's no ears getting red, pits in the stomach. It's
Mm-hmm.
just gone. And I just feel lighter for shedding that and not having this kind of what I'd consider a horrific secret that I'm carrying around. It just doesn't exist. So, yeah, super grateful. Something that I didn't even think to ask the medicine to show me a way through this. It just happened, and it's just it's another example of just how powerful this medicine is. That
Mm-hmm.
it can find the things that you don't want to talk about and be like, ah, you should probably look at this. Pull them to the surface.
Yeah. And you mentioned feeling lighter. That really stands out for me because that's how I would describe it. I had a friend, asking me one time, how do I feel after a psychedelic journey or experience? And I said, it's kind of like if you put my entire body in a washing machine and you click heavy wash, with bleach and as much Tide Pods in there as you can. And then you come out and you feel like all that dirt, all that residue just washing off you. And it feels like you're an entirely new person and you've got a new perspective, but you feel lighter. I know for me, I went years, even before my father passed away, I went years not wanting to talk about, my situation at home. I was very much ashamed, especially as a kid growing up. I was mortified to, have any of my friends find out that my father was an alcoholic. And I just never talked about it. And, in fact, I found myself, I was out in Arizona last Thursday to catch a hockey game out there with one of my old buddies from grade school. And, we grew up together. And, I found myself talking about my dad to him in ways I had never talked about. And he looked at me and he was like, I didn't know that you were going through this as a kid. Like, I didn't know that you were exposed to all of that. And it's a conversation that I know that I would have never been comfortable enough to have, like even 4 or 5 years ago. But here I find myself, I feel open, I feel free. And I think that's important. I mean, wouldn't you agree?
So important. I mean, this kind of goes back to your previous point of we. It's not just about psychedelic medicine that we can't have a reasonable discussion on. We don't talk in this culture. We don't really talk about trauma or mental health um, the same way we talk about physical illnesses. You have cancer, oh, poor you. You break a leg, oh, poor you. You have depression, you have anxiety, you have a substance use challenge. no, you've done something wrong. You eat too much. You've done something wrong. You're anorexic. You've done something wrong. It's not,
Mhm.
we just don't have normal conversations. And we, at least for me, in the way I was raised, trauma was something that happened to like war veterans or like people who've been horribly abused. That wasn't me. My life is normal.
Right.
Um, because I didn't know the pieces that weren't normal. Like nobody's said to me, "Oh, your father doesn't have to be an alcoholic." That, oh, not everybody's dad's an alcoholic. I just didn't know. But I think the more of us that, as much as talking about psychedelics, is let's just talk about mental health. Let's talk about things that hurt, things that help, and normalize this conversation. I think it's a big step forward for all of us.
Yeah, it is. I mean, these are things that, yeah, I know at age 41, I come from a generation, I think one of the last generations where it was not okay to talk about the fact that you were not okay.
Mm-hmm.
You were taught even by your parents to kind of keep those feelings private. And so I know for us, especially, now grown men, um, growing up the way we did, being taught, I don't know if this applies to you, but I know it applied for me. My father was very much a macho man type father, and men aren't supposed to cry, and again, you're not supposed to show emotion, and that's just how I was raised. And so, it obviously wasn't the best way to grow up as a child. But I kind of want to talk about that because, I feel like now us in a situation, I'm not a parent, but I know you are. Um, we're trying to not make the same mistakes. But I think now with things like psychedelics, we're also finding access to resources and tools that I like to call them that our parents certainly did not have access to. And these tools and resources are allowing us to kind of better understand ourselves now as adults. And I think you put it, somewhere in the book that, as an adult, you don't know everything. You look at adults as a kid and you think, oh, they've got it all figured out. I remember looking at my parents who, when they were my age and thinking, oh, they've got life figured out. They know, who they are. They've got the answers to everything. And now realizing that it's not the case, and even my mom now in her 70s, I know she's still trying to find herself, and that's okay. But we're learning that that's okay. We're learning it's okay to not have the answers to everything, and we're applying that knowledge, I think, to how we're raising our kids now. And so that's where I kind of want to take the conversation here, because I know Cole, your son, joined you on a psychedelic retreat. And I know that might, come across as a bit controversial for some folks out there, but we'll make it very clear. Cole did not partake in any psychedelic substances, was there solely as an observer. But I think that's great because the conversation about how do we talk to our kids about psychedelics, let alone drugs, but let's talk about psychedelics. It's not the same conversation that you would have 10, 15 years ago where all drugs were shoved under one umbrella and they're all bad. Crack
Mm-hmm.
cocaine is just as bad as meth, is just as bad as marijuana, is just as bad as shrooms. There's no exceptions. So you talk to me a little bit how that conversation has evolved here and how you've applied it to your parenting of your children, and specifically the decision to bring a child into a world that otherwise you may not bring them into in terms of exposing them to a psychedelic experience.
Yeah, this is really an interesting question, David. So there's Cole knew that I was deeply involved in this. He saw I went back to school to get a master's in psychology and neuroscience, focused on, and my whole thesis or dissertation was on ketamine and
Mhm.
adult symptoms with oral ketamine with adults with anxiety. He has heard tons of conversations, and I was really shocked when he said he wanted to come to a psychedelic retreat. And I was first shocked because it's like, oh wow, he's asking to come to this. And the second, it's like, why haven't I offered? Um, when he asked, I said, well, do you want to do psychedelics? Is that why you're asking? He said, no, I just want to see what you're up to. I was like, oh, that's interesting. Okay. So sure enough, we went out to this experience, and in the particular retreat that what this one was is it's kind of 2 days of lecture and introspection followed by a sacrament day.
Okay.
And during that day, he helped the facilitators. If somebody had to go to the bathroom, he helped walk them. He brought blankets. He kept refilling water bottles. He was just kind of there to help and to be of service, which is yeah, it was an interesting role for him to assume. And he saw a number of people having a variety of experiences. And then at the end of it, this particular retreat, everybody kind of gathers in a living room and there's a fire. And I remember him, we were on this big beanbag chair and he's laying down. I'm kind of just stroking his hair and he's listening to men, men and women, but adults share really personal stories and men crying and men saying to other men, I love you. And that was beautiful. The other thing that happened during that experience is at one point I was on my journey and I opened my eyes and he was right there in front of me. And I was like, wow. And I was able to give him this huge hug. And during the hug, I could feel like our
Mhm.
DNA was wrapping around each other. I could just feel so connected to him. And I ended up saying to him something to the effect of, you know, Cole, my parents both died when I was super young, and nobody gives an instruction manual on how to be a parent. And I just need you to know that I'm doing the best that I can. I love you so very much, and I just need you to know that. And that was then we held each other a little bit longer, and then he went on to go help other people, and I continued on my journey. And it was just this beautiful moment. Yeah, that I so treasure that we had that experience. I'm glad that he saw drugs being used in an intentional way,
Mhm.
lots of healing, saw that men don't, we, as adults, we don't have it all figured out. We don't know what we want to be when we grow up just because we're 50 or 60 or 70. We don't know everything about relationships, even if we've been married for 20 or 30 years. He got to see all that. And at 16, I had no idea that that world existed. So super grateful to have been able to share that with him.
Yeah, and I'm sure that's a moment that's going to stay with him for the rest of his life. It sounds just like a beautiful moment. There's no question about a beautiful experience. What's in the time after? Yeah, I mean, is there still curiosity there from Cole in terms of psychedelics? And then I mean, it brings up a great question as well. One that we covered on Psychedelic Spotlight recently. Sasha Hebert, who's our COO, she's a mother and a mother of a teenager, and her child's at that age where they are also starting to ask about drugs, and it's out there. And I mean, drugs were out there when I grew up. And I feel like there's two approaches. You can, as a parent, you can try to just give them the don't do drugs are bad conversation, or you can have the more open conversation that I think, you presented. But I mean, has Cole's, I mean, do you notice that Cole's curiosity is grown since then? Have there been more questions? But, do you feel that the questions are maybe presented in a way that now come from a context of sort of understanding and seeing drugs in a different light? I'm just curious to know what that experience has done in terms of how Cole views drugs.
Yeah, I think so. For as to the best of my knowledge, this is not a world that he has entered into. He has not partaken in any of these substances, but certainly his friends have. Um, I think he has respect for the power of the drug. Um, I mean, he's seen certainly what the range of effect can be from these medicines. I hear him having discussions with his friends. He's had friends talk to me about the importance of source and getting your drugs tested. Because I mean, a bunch of these kids,
Yeah.
they're essentially buying them off of Instagram. I know it's not literally Instagram; it's some local person advertising Instagram, but what is in that they're taking? So that's always kind of my number one lecture point with these with youth is if you're going to do this, you need to afford the testing strips. You need to go make sure you know what you're taking because too much of what you're buying is sold as X and is Y, and that's when people die. And I'm coming from a point where they know I'm not anti-drug. I'm anti people dying from drugs. So
Yeah.
I hope they hear me differently than they might hear somebody else with that. Not saying it to scare you, just If you can afford, if you're going to do this, get them tested. Um, and then I also think they hear me when I'm saying, for me, having intentionality is is helps create a just a different container. Like, why are
Mhm.
you doing drugs to begin with? And again, I don't judge. So you're having anxiety, you're having depression, you're not sure what you want to do in your life. Great, all that's fine. Let's explore that really deeply. But turning off, whether it's a six pack of beer or an illegal drug, is just tuning out. Is just trying to numb the pain. It's not going to work. And I hope they hear me with that as well. Can it be fun? Sure, but it's not really getting at the root issues. And I think I'll say one more thing. I think psychedelics have taught me, like, I can I can look at somebody now and with absolute sincerity, be like, you're enough. You're good just as you
Mhm.
are. You don't have to do anything. But what about college? What about this? You're going to be fine. You are fine. Not current, not future tense. You are fine.
Mhm.
You've always been fine, and you're going to be fine. So take the pressure off. It's not real. These are just stories and obligations that you're carrying that you don't have to carry. And you're
Yeah.
beautiful. So again, I don't know if that resonates or gets through. I think it does. It certainly does sometimes.
Yeah, and I hope it does because in this day and age that we live in, especially the day and age that the younger generation is growing up in, there's so much pressure from social media. I mean, you look at Instagram, and it's not a representation of how people on there really live their lives, but that's how people think that they live their lives. They look at these influencers and think that they wake up, with pretty
Mm-hmm.
faces, makeup on them, and the rock hard six pack abs and all that, and that's what they think they need to be. And so that creates, I think, a lot of pressure on the youth here today. And so my hope, and I'm curious, as we evolve here as a society, and as psychedelics start to slowly make their way more into society in an acceptable manner. We'll get into accessibility in just a moment, but I mean, how important is this? Being able to introduce psychedelics to folks out there who, again, are living with this pressure of life, just needing to be a certain person, whether it's personally or professionally. I mean, really, just being able to, like you said, understand that you are enough. I mean, that's such a hard thing to get across to people, but I feel like it's so necessary. So I don't know. I mean, amongst the many different things out there that psychedelics can help in terms of making people better and helping them live better lives, what is your outlook on that? What is your outlook in terms of helping this next generation that's coming up that may have access to psychedelics in ways that we simply didn't?
Yeah. So I think as a culture, we're off. We are we are a very accumulation materialistic culture. Um, there's a lot about scarcity versus abundance. This is mine, not yours, and there's no room for us both to have it. There's a lot with our culture that's challenging, and I think what psychedelics can do is help people realize that you don't have to play that game. There is plenty for everyone. Um, and arguably, what's kind of interesting is I don't know. I think the rules are being rewritten. We're watching the rules being rewritten. How
Mm-hmm.
you know what houses cost in Vegas or in many cities? You just can't. They're not going to be able to compete for many, 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 many years if they try to play the same game that we played.
No.
So they've got to rewrite the rules. Now, does that look like van life? Maybe. Does it look like some type of other type of cooperative communities? Maybe. I don't know. But but the reality is we don't need all this stuff. We don't need to work two incomes, 60 hours each to be able to live in this particular neighborhood and send our kids to this private school so that they have the chance to get into this college, so they have the chance to get that job that they don't really want anyhow. And I think I'm hoping that's becoming more and more apparent. And that when you unlock this technology, it's like, oh, it's not what is the source of my anxiety? What is the source of my depression? It's not biochemical. I'm not broken.
Mhm.
The source is all this other stuff, all this other things of I'm not enough. I'm not enough for my parents. I'm not worthy of their love. I'm not enough for my school. I'm not enough for this teacher. I'm not enough for, and on. And if you can remove all that, life just looks different.
Yeah. I mean, can you imagine if we had access to some of this, earlier on in our life? I mean, I think about it sometimes. I, all of the trauma and just the depression and just the anxiety that I probably would have been able to maybe in some instances avoid. I don't think you can avoid all of it, but I mean, I know I was, at a young age, very insecure. A lot of that had to do with the family that I came out of. But now just looking back, and a lot of it always stemmed from, I never felt like I was enough. I never felt like I was living up to the standard that I needed to live up to. And now, and sort of being able to break all of that down and come to a more clear understanding of it all, I realized that I am enough, and that's allowed me to enhance my relationships with the people around me, the people that I work with, the people that I work for. It's just in many ways made me a much better human being and much better person. And it's just, again, I don't know if you ever think about where your life could be had you discovered psychedelics a lot sooner, and how different things could have been. But I think about it a lot.
Yeah, and maybe, but I also think, and I think, David, you had the perfect life to get to where you are right this moment. That you're taking all of these, for whatever reason, you created and experienced all these different situations that helps frame your perspective, that then now you're sharing and all the different things you're doing through your work, through the messaging you're sending out there, through your relationships. Um, I'm grateful you had the life you've had to get you here.
Yeah.
So it's one of those things that, would you have scripted it that way? No, but you're here and you're beautiful and you're enough and you're loving and you're loved, and it's and people need to hear your stories for them in their
Yeah.
journey. So you're carrying it forward.
Yeah, that's the way I like to try to look at it. And spreading that message, I think, is important. And the other thing that I give a lot of thought to is accessibility.
Mm-hmm.
I think for us, just being where we are, we are fortunate enough in some ways to be able to have access to these medicines and to these treatments, retreats, and whether it's ketamine clinics, what have you. Unfortunately, there's a lot of individuals out there that, live at or below the poverty line, and they're not in a place to be able to explore these medicines and these treatments, at least not yet. And, it's something that I think about a lot, only because of the fact that, growing up, we grew up just at that poverty line. We never really dipped below it, but we had some very, very tough times out there. With my mom having to support the family of four, given the fact that, my dad could never really hold a job. So we struggled. And so I think about it, and, I think I mentioned this earlier in the conversation, that it's unfortunate that, we were never able to introduce my father to psychedelics earlier in his life, because I do think it could have possibly changed the course of what happened with him. But nonetheless, I look back and I think, 15, 20, 25 years ago, would we have been able to afford it, especially in insurance companies? They don't cover it. And the answer to that question is no. So unless we were buying, mushrooms or, LSD from someone behind a 7-Eleven, and expecting him to do it at home, and expecting him to understand intention and integration and all these things that go into helping leverage the use of psychedelics to the benefit of overcoming trauma, it was never going to happen. And so that's important, because it's not just the psychedelics. It is the intention, it's the integration, it's the environment, it's all of that. But it's not cheap. And it's not something that, someone again can just go, on the street corner buy and expect, oh, okay, well, I'm suffering from depression. I'm going to go buy, a couple of bags of mushrooms from my neighbor, and I'm going to expect to go home, take it. I'm going to be okay. Not the case. So I don't know. What's your thought on accessibility as we lay the groundwork here for the psychedelic space? I hate using the word industry, but it's going to inevitably become an industry, but one that I think we have an opportunity to shape in a way that those that would ordinarily get left behind maybe won't get left behind this time. So just curious to hear your thoughts on all that.
Yeah, I mean, accessibility is certainly high up in the things I think about. I want to divide this answer into two parts. Part one is going to be on legal psychedelics. Part two is on illegal psychedelics. On the legal side, we're talking about ketamine. In America, you're looking at $450 to $1,000 per session if you're going to go into a clinic.
Mm-hmm.
1,000 to 1,200 for 6 sessions if you're using a telehealth company. Pretty much you can get nasal ketamine, esketamine, sometimes with insurance, but for the most part, it's a pain in the ass, and people are paying out of pocket. So even if we say, okay, $1,200 telehealth, that's the way to go. That's still a lot of money. It's $1,200. It's a lot of money. Now, is it an everyday drug? No. Is it something that you can do potentially 6 times and not again? Maybe, or maybe once a month, once every 2 months, but it's still a lot of money. So I'm hoping that with all of the data and these companies coming up trying to aggregate the data, that insurance companies will quickly see how much less expensive it is for them to cover ketamine versus traditional talk therapy and antidepressants, and that'll shift. So that's we're hoping that happens. We can then move our way to MDMA and psilocybin. Again, it's going to be expensive, and hard to get through legal methods. So then we move into the underground world of retreats,
Mm-hmm.
and people can fly. Oh, I can go to Jamaica, Mexico, Costa Rica, Peru. Great. You're talking about 3,500 to $5,000 a pop plus travel. It's expensive. It's legal there, but it's expensive. Underground retreats in America, typically, I'd say 1,200 to 3,500 for kind of a 2 ceremony 3-night experience is what I'm seeing. I don't know what you're seeing, David.
Yeah.
Expensive. What I will tell people who are listening to this, who are saying, I want to do a retreat and I just can't figure out how to afford to do it. I promise you, if you reach out to those retreat organizers, if you can figure out who's organizing a retreat and explain your financial situation, many of them will find a way for you to participate. Absolutely. Does that help on mass scale? No,
Yeah.
but it helps. It helps a little bit. Yeah, I just came out of an experience where there were 4 people of color. Actually, I came out go back 2 experiences ago, and there was one person of color, and then he left. Why am I a unicorn? I'm the only one here. I'm like, I don't know a lot of people of color, so you go get more, and let's have some more experience retreats. And sure enough, then there's 4, and I would imagine the next one. Actually, I know that they're gonna 2 of them are branching off and working with a different facilitator to create just a person of color retreat. And that's a whole different discussion of why that community, even if they have the income, feel like they have less accessibility to
Yeah.
these medicines. But that's a beautiful discussion, um, because it can do tremendous healing regardless of skin color, regardless of race, regardless of sexual orientation, and regardless of income level. So I'm optimistic that the more ways that these medicines are legal, the more ways people will find to get them to every walk of life.
I agree. And I mean, what do you say to, the folks out there? Because I don't know if you've noticed this, but, someone like myself that has spent time, here in this developing market sector, community, whatever, however we want to refer to it as the psychedelic space. It's a very clear line that's been drawn in the sand, at least from my perspective. On one side, you have folks that are very anti-capitalist, very anti seeing this take any route where big pharma is going to be able to get their hands on psychedelics, and they've got fantastic arguments, for that. Should companies be out there trying to trademark the way certain psychedelic medicines are administered and the environment in which they're administered? I mean, that's a very touchy subject right now, especially given the fact that these medicines and these substances date back to indigenous communities centuries ago. And these indigenous communities are, in some instances, being left out of the potential profit center, if you will, that's going to become the psychedelic space. And, I can certainly say that I don't think that that's right. I don't agree with that. But on the other side of it, like we were talking about, well, if we want mass accessibility, just given the way society is structured, insurance companies are going to have to get behind this. Not everyone has insurance, but a good portion of society does. And I think enough to really flood the market, with psychedelic assisted healing, and more specifically, get it in front of people that can benefit it from the most, regardless of income status. So what do you say to folks out there? I'm sure you've come across them that say, no, I absolutely do not want to see psychedelics go down the big pharma route. Let's keep this underground. Let's keep this sacred to indigenous communities. Do you say anything? I mean, what is your thought on that?
There's so much to unpack in what you just said
I
there.
know.
There's
No way to unpack it all,
there's a lot. So
unfortunately.
let me try to address just various points. So we talk about indigenous cultures. I think it's important for people to understand that psychedelics have been used, psilocybin, mushrooms grow in every continent except Antarctica. That indigenous cultures, we all think immediately, oh, Native Americans or Central and South America, but Scandinavia, African, European, the witches that were burned back in the days, those are oftentimes using psychedelics. So most of us have lineages that trace back to indigenous groups or of using psychedelic medicine. It's not just Central South American, Native American. Just at least that's my take on this. The when we talk about the medical model versus the decriminalization model, they're two different philosophies. And how do we get more people access to psychedelics? And I can see both arguments. I think what Rick Doblin and Multidisciplinary Association of Psychedelic Studies have done is like, we're going to get MDMA to be legal, FDA approved, consistently delivered, and we're going to do it under a public benefit corporation model. How beautiful. Good for them. Other groups are saying we're going to patent unique either compounds or compound delivery methods, or to guarantee a consistent, clean, that we know that A equals A equals A. I get that. And when we're talking about the way our culture is built around insurance and how medicine is delivered, that's all it's needed. We then switch, though, away from the medical mentality, which is just hard because you say, okay, well, if we don't accept that we're broken, and we don't accept that that we need fixing, that we have, or that we've given up our authority to someone else, to the doctors, to the people who know more. Well, then the decriminalization people step in and they're like, wait, whoa, you can't make plants illegal. What's wrong with you people? This is just not okay. And I can see what they're trying to say. So I love when I'm seeing kind of like what Colorado did. We're going to decriminalize 5 psychedelics, and we're going to create a legalized framework for a medical model in the state. That seems to be a pretty reasonable compromise. If, again, I know there's sometimes not a lot of room for compromise there, but that seems to be reasonable. And then I think the third leg of the stool that's not often talked about is the religious movement. There's a number of us who believe that when we take a psychedelic, it's a sacrament. It's a communion with God. It is it's a connection to a higher power, whatever that is to you. And there's the whole religious Freedom Restoration Act argument, or that's another way to access it. And the question then becomes for us as a culture, it's like, well, it's not really medicine, and they're not really trying to decriminalize it. They're trying to use it for religious purposes. Is that recreational? What is that? I think it's religious. But that's a whole nother, it's just another path to go down. And I think all three have their points, have their places, and are different ways to access the medicine. So long answer
Mhm.
short, I think any way that gives people more access to psychedelics is a start in the right direction, and that we can keep fine tuning as different methods come out there. And then I do hope that the market itself protects frivolous patents from being able to happen on,
Yeah.
oh, we're going to do this in a comfy chair in a living room setting. Nonsense like that just doesn't get patented. But spending a bunch of money, $100 million on a compound to deliver that consistently, yeah, they probably have the right to get that patented and should get it patented. And that can benefit all of us.
Yeah, I agree. And thank you for clarifying it. Patent. I use the word trademark, and that's only because it's at the top of my head right now because we're in the process of trademarking something. But yes, patents is the correct term to use there. And I'm not going to name the company that has, been out there trying to patent almost everything that they can get their hands on. But it has ruffled a lot of feathers
Sure.
out there, and rightfully so. And again, I do hope that that does get scaled back and that there are some protections put into place here as this space and as this industry continues to materialize and come together. Because again, I'm one that, yes, I want mass accessibility. My own personal belief is, yes, I think in order for that to happen, there's going to have to be this medical clinical component to it where pharma is going to have to be involved. But I'm not one to trample over the rights of anyone and everyone out there. So it's a thin line that needs to be walked.
And it can be
But
an and. It can be an
it
and.
can
There's
be.
no reason why legislation can't promote the and. Do both. If you want to go pick mushrooms, you should be allowed to pick mushrooms. And if you want to go in and be treated because you're subscribing to that model, yeah, then you probably want to know that this particular 3 grams of psilocybin is exactly what you think it is.
Yeah.
Same strain, same consistency, boom, boom. That it's, yeah,
Yeah,
it's
and the
different.
decision, yeah, I agree. And the decision as to, where I feel comfortable partaking in my sacrament, in my journey, in my experience, I think should be up to me at the end of the day. It should be up to the people. If I choose to want to do this, in the comfort of my own home, whether it's alone or whether it's surrounded by friends or family, I should have that option versus, only having the option to do it at a clinic or in a clinical setting. And I hope that those options stay available because I think it's important because I think trying to force psychedelics, given the complexities of them, into a certain box, I think is just going to dilute, if it will. I
Mm-hmm.
think the potency or the capabilities, I guess you can say. So I just hope it doesn't go down that route.
I love Carl Hart's book, Drug Use for Grown-Ups. Well, it covers a lot of these topics. And if you haven't read it or listeners haven't read it, it's such a great, he's such a wealth of information on drugs and kind of how we got to this point as a society. It's a great read if you haven't read it.
Yeah, so I'll definitely have to check that out. Because yeah, I mean it's a topic that I want to go down the rabbit hole even more. There's a lot to explore here.
Mm-hmm.
And so, with that, before we wrap up, I want to talk a little bit about your current project that you're getting prepared to launch here. It's Happy. If you want to share, with our listeners and our viewers out there a little bit about what Happy is and what we can expect coming soon here with it.
Yeah, probably by the time this goes live, Happy will be live. So it's happy with two Y's.me. It's run, the CEO is a gentleman named Wolf Schlagman, who's built a couple other telehealth companies. And we feel like we're fighting the unhappiness epidemic using the only legalized psychedelic medicine that's out there, which is ketamine. And again, to accessibility, we're trying to keep our costs as low as possible by building systems and technology that helps create a consistent experience. We give digital therapeutics or activities every day that people can take after the ketamine, and we connect our members with a network of doctors and prescribing clinicians as well as a network of guides to help prepare them and integrate the experience. So we think it's yeah, it's gonna be a powerful, hopefully a powerful tool. We've got beautiful music and meditations and kind of a um, ceremonial components to it that we think is kind of unique in the space. And we're again trying to figure out how do we get this into the hands of people who need it.
Oh, sounds exciting. And I hope we have an opportunity to have you back on to talk a little bit more about it in the near future. But in the meantime, it's psychedelics for everyone. I highly, highly, highly recommend it. You can get it on Amazon. I think it's available also on Apple, Audible, and if you're old school, Barnes and Noble. I don't know if
There you go. They still
so.
have them.
Yeah, they do. They do. Not as many. I remember in the '90s, those were the place to hang out. That was the
Yes.
spot to
Now
go.
they're harder to find.
Yeah, yeah. But nonetheless, Matt, congratulations on the book. Fantastic read. I really appreciated it. And I really appreciate the stories that you shared, both within the book and here today. It's always great to have such a wonderful conversation, an open conversation. So thank you so much again for everything.
David, I appreciate you having me on. I appreciate you taking the time to actually read the book and what you shared today. I mean, you shared quite a lot, and that means a lot to me. I really appreciate that.
Yeah, it's honestly one of the first times that I've done it. On a podcast here that we're going to publish. I felt that it was time to do it, and we've developed a rapport here. I felt comfortable enough to share these stories here with you. So again, thank you for creating an environment that made me feel comfortable to be able to open up here.
That means a lot. I'm
Yeah,
grateful for what you do. Thank you, David.
thank you, Matt, and we'll talk soon.
Sounds good.
Thank you.